Welcome to the Monstrous podcast, where we explore familiar tropes of the horror genre and apply a feminist lens to it. I'm Clelia, one of your podcast hosts. In this series, we are turning our attention to the representation of female monsters in horror cinema, and in each episode, we dissect one film we feel fits the bill particularly well. And tonight, this film is Teeth.
Yeah, and I'm Megan, the other host of the podcast. So just to give a little synopsis for anyone who's not seen Teeth, and if not, why not? Run, don't walk. Pause this podcast, go and watch it, and then come back. But Teeth is a 2007 comedy horror written and directed by Lichtenstein. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And it follows Dawn, an active member of a high school chastity club, whose ideas about purity are tested when she meets Tobey. A romantic encounter turns violent, and Dawn discovers that there may be more to her than meets the eye. Drawing on folklore and criticisms of patriarchy and its associated rape culture, medical subjugation of women, and the dangers of purity culture, the film chronicles Dawn's transformation from a staunch defender of abstinence to an avenging heroine with castrating genitals. Very exciting.
Very exciting.
So why did we choose this film then, Clelia?
Well, I mean, for all the mentions that you mentioned above, really, I think the themes of this film are just excellent, and it's going to give us a chance to really dig deep into the representation of the female monster in all its gory. So yeah, I mean, I don't know about you. I don't know when did you first see the film? Because for me, it was actually I wasn't aware of it for years. So I don't know about you.
I feel like, and I'm an unreliable narrator at this point, but I feel like I saw it maybe around, if not just when it came out, not very long after. And I think I might have even had it on DVD at some point, and it's been lost in the shuffle. But I do remember seeing it and just absolutely loving it. And I did find a really interesting summation when I was doing some reading today that I thought really summed up why I loved it. And so I thought I would share it with you and see if you also agreed. It was in a paper from Casey Ryan Kelly, who refers to the film as a subversive iteration of the rape revenge film, and one that positions Dawn as this violent heroine who's refusing to stick to this binary between masculine violence and feminine victimhood. And I thought, how we're talking about women and monstrousness and monstrous feminine, that idea that women can be violent, not just, the victim, the slasher fodder, I thought were really interesting. So I wondered what you thought about that.
I love that, and I think it's really it's a really interesting reading of the film, and in the sense that so many people think of it as rightly so. I mean, I know it is labeled as a comedy horror. And I think that's partly the reason why I stayed away from it for longer than I should have, because I mean, first of all, I don't think I was aware of it when he originally came out, but I remember seeing marketing stills for the film not long after, and it kind of made me feel uncomfortable, like like it was a joke at women's expense, kill a vagina, and and the stills looked a bit like American Pie, and I was like, this doesn't seem like it's for me. But when I eventually watched it and started doing research for it for the course, I was like, oh wait, that's not at all what I was expecting. acting. And in fact, I don't know about you, but the comedy aspect bypassed me completely of the film. It's just now when I rewatch it that I think those elements come through for me. So I love it. I really do, and I really like the that you bring up so early on in our conversation the rape revenge aspect of the film, because I totally agree with you, and in fact I kind of I know that you've been probably doing a lot more thinking than me around this, so I'm really excited to hear about your reception, about what you think of this reading of the film.
Well, I think, like you've said, that initially it could be seen as quite a light-hearted, almost, as you said, like offensive look at women's bodies and rape culture and all them things. And I wonder if that does put some people off, and I'd be really interested to hear actually from our listeners if they'd had a similar reaction to it. But I do think that it is actually, much like Ginger Snaps, as we talked about last time, very groundbreaking in its presentation, not only of Dawn as, this idea about rape revenge, but obviously presenting Vagina Dentata, which we are going to go into in quite a lot of detail because I am obsessed with it. But yes, so I was reading about Barbara Creed's opinion on rape revenge and, how it ties into Monstrous Feminine. And I thought a really interesting way that she talked about sort of rape revenge generally, and she used I Spit on Your Grave as an example, which I don't think we should necessarily be putting Teeth and I Spit on Your Grave together because, again, thinking about that comedy element. But one of the things that Creed says is that in I Spit on Your Grave as a case study, that both the rape itself and then her revenge are really sexualized. So even when she's, going after her rapists, it's very sexual. And I was thinking about it in context of Teeth, because obviously that's what we're talking about today, but this idea that in I Spit on Your Grave, there's this notion that women equals sex and death, that is part of this monstrousness. But in Teeth, and I'm interested in your thoughts on it, because I think that it's very different, because Creed's assertion is that I Spit on Your Grave is not a feminist film, that it is misogynist, and that it keeps the victim, if you like, as the abject. And for me, I think Teeth's really different, because although sex is linked to Dawn's revenge and it's integral to how she gets her revenge, it is represented more comically or in a more sterile way, like, when she's in doctor's office. And it did make me wonder whether Dawn is not presented as other femme castratrices. Castratrices have been. So my thought that I'm sort of winding to and rambling to is that in Teeth, I think that it's men who are presented as abject. So, Tobey, when he's whining that, he's not jerked off since Easter, and then you've got a stepbrother who's got that creepy obsession with her, and then even in final scene, that gross old man who's like flicking his tongue at her, they are the objects of disgust.
Oh, don't.
Oh God, it's so gross. But like, they are the objects of disgust, so and Dawn is not an object of disgust. I don't know, do you agree? Disagree?
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and in fact, when we talk about the comedy element of the film, which and in terms of the reception of the film, I think it's really interesting, and it's something that's cropped up a lot when I've talked about it to groups of people, that I find that men and women have such different reaction to it, and very often I think women love the film, and actually the comedy element is kind of goes sort of over their head, because yes, it is blown out of it's put in situation, and there's comedic elements to the language, I would say, in in the film, or the editing, etc. But actually the situations they kind of encapsulate that women experience really well. So I find that what men react to really badly about this film is that they feel, I don't know if it's maybe the fact that actually the they are the butt of the joke actually in the film. It's like it's not about, as you said, it's not about women being abject and being monstrous. It's about women reacting to, a society where you are supposed to be both a virgin and a whore.
Yeah.
And, actually in a society that has turned us into something monstrous, but that we can, that we can play to advantage and become quite powerful thanks to that. So yeah, no, I just find those reactions really, really interesting, and kind of like, it kind of highlights for me that double standard that we have in society. Thinking about what men and women.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I think it's very graphic, but played sort of comically, the actual castration itself, and it's quite rare to see that in film and to see it presented so explicitly. And I think that it might make men in audience uncomfortable, but then I think the things that Dawn goes through, like that doctor's appointment when she don't really know what's happening, and then he's suddenly, saying, "Oh, take your underpants off and I'm gonna examine you."
It's the fact that he asks her. Is the fact that he asks her, right? Like, do you know what to expect?
Yeah.
It's like, for me, that question is so triggering, right? Because at this very moment, he sets her up as, playing on her naivety, and it's just so gross. Oh my God.
Oh, it's so gross. I mean, that's the thing I think that comes through in Teeth again and again is the shared disgust of women for what she experiences, because a lot of women will have had a pushy creep who's like, "Oh, come on, let's blue balls, all this rubbish, this shit that, we all listen to, we all have to hear." And a doctor that makes you uncomfortable, but you don't really know why, and having your concerns. I mean, the fact that she goes to him with these concerns and he basically just totally ignores her, again, thinking about, we'll talk about it as we talk about the purity culture elements of film, but I don't think that that's an experience that's explicitly tied to purity culture. I think Dawn's alienation from her own body is cultural, not religious. I think it's encouraged. I mean, you see it. I always think about that scene when they're looking at an anatomy book and there's that big sticker and it's like, you can't look at this. This is shameful. This is frightening. And coming back to that idea that Creed and a lot of other writers have talked about, which is that it's frightening because it's powerful. So really, what we're talking about is patriarchy and misogyny being petrified of the power of women's bodies, but as a result of that, you were encouraged to be alien, to be strangers to herself.
What do you make of? Let's get deep into into the subject, but let's start about what we're here to talk about. We know it, the vagina dentata, and but yeah, no, let's get into it. And how do you think the mythology around? I mean, the film doesn't waste a lot of time, right? To kind of explain, what it is, the mythology around it. It's almost kind of like it's a fact, it's accepted, and then it's kind of like that's not the theme of the film. It's not for us to for her to find out what it is and what it does, right? It's more about dealing with dealing with the fact that she is gifted with it, but reading about the myth and the lore around vagina dentata, how do you think that the film is exploring the mythology around this in the themes that it that he explores in the film?
Well, what I did do, and I can discuss very briefly, is I collected some stories about some myths about vagina dentata. If you would like me to share them.
Of course, please.
As part of my folklorist obsession. And it's interesting because you see that they are, in principle, in theory, cautionary tales that are, it's seen as a way to discourage rape and sexual violence. But we know that that's not the case, that actually all that happens is women are punished for these myths and still are to this day in certain countries and things like that. But I did collect a couple. So from North America, the Panto and Oto tribes, and I'm hoping I've done my best with pronunciation here, but they tell the story of a a coyote who outwits this wicked old woman, which immediately made me think, witch, perhaps. I'm going to try and look into it a little bit more. But this woman's implanted teeth in the vaginas of her daughter and also a prisoner who she's kept in this house. And so these women use their toothy vaginas to seduce, rob, and kill men. So the wily coyote, we could say, kills the woman, the witchy woman, the wicked old lady. These are not my terms, by the way. Girls got to eat. So, but kills the woman and her daughter, eventually marries the prisoner. And what I thought was particularly interesting, and it's something I think we'll come back to, is he knocks out all of her teeth except for one because it's quite thrilling when having sex. So that's one story that I think starts to pull out this idea about the sort of thrill of the violence that's associated with this mythology, but also the idea that the stories themselves, even though they're supposed to be centered on a woman and her body, are really male focused. But then in Japan, we have a story from the Inu legends, which tells of a demon, who tried to seduce a woman, and she rejected the demon, as one might expect. And so he hid inside her vagina. She tries to move on with her life, marries a man. On the wedding night, the demon snaps off his penis and is emasculated. And this happens to a second husband. This woman's just trying to live a life. She don't want a demon in her vagina. So
the egg.
So to break the curse...
That's going to be my favourite so far.
To break the curse, she enlists the help of a blacksmith who crafts an iron phallus. And then when she's penetrated with this, the demon bites down on it and breaks its teeth and flees. And there is actually still a festival in Japan every year that celebrates this, that I think we should really, really look into visiting. Yes.
Yeah, we need, at the very least, we need to upload pictures for the listeners. Sure.
Yes, absolutely. It looks marvellous. And then the third and final one comes from New Mexico, where a chap called Killer of Enemies, starting strong with that name, Killer of Enemies enters the House of Vaginas, where 4 girls who are really vaginas masquerading as girls, which I thought was an interesting one. Some sort of, just a vagina alone, no body attached, lives, and they devour men who are kicked inside by their father, who's called Kicking Monster. Killer of Enemies outsmarts him and doesn't give him a chance to throw him into the house, to throw him to the angry teeth. So he enters the house and convinces the women to eat some sour berries that destroy the teeth and pucker the mouths. And this was the part that I thought was particularly relevant to our discussion. So it puckers the mouth so that they can only swallow, which they find much more pleasurable, apparently.
Oh, I see. There's
some
hidden messages in there. It's very colourful.
Very colourful. But when I was looking at it, I just thought, it returns us again and again to this idea that women need to have the bite kicked out of them, and that you're meant to swallow, to endure, not to fight back. That, that these, in these stories, the hero, and I use that very in like double quotations. The hero, their journey is always to remove these teeth, to break these teeth, to break the woman so that she is more subservient and more, amenable to what, to patriarchy, essentially. But what are your thoughts?
It's very frightening
about those.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's really frightening that those stories, those myths around, in the end, all encapsulating the same idea, crop up everywhere around the world, right? So it's definitely, it's just it's kind of it's a little bit scary that there's no escape from it. I mean, when I did some research around it, I found that there are some, three distinct subcategories around the vagina dentata myth, which I think are, quite well encapsulated in the, illustrated in the film. You get, the first, as you mentioned already, but, as cishet intercourse being framed as a mythic conquest of the man over a woman to tame her. So like Perseus' victory over Medusa. And I think that's quite clearly illustrated in the Ryan storyline where he tricks Dawn into having sex with him, and then gets his upcoming anyway. When it is clear that he has betrayed her, then it's just, otherwise it's a straight up cautionary tale warning men against rape. And I think that's the storyline with Tobey is like that's it's very like I said, a very straight cautionary tale. And the third one is which is a variation on the story that's not found in a lot of places, but actually dealing with the agency of the person in possession of the vagina dentata. And I think that's, we see that in, with Dawn's journey, and at the end, the fact that she decides to use her power for to defend herself, but also to also as a in a rape revenge scenario sort of thing. So she decides to become sort of a revenge figure, take action on all those gross dirty dudes.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because reading around rape revenge today for us to talk about this, it is interesting how many of those films, and this ties into particularly ones from sort of 70s and things, present women as insane, mentally ill for as part of this revenge. And I think what I like so much about Teeth is that it never does that. So I can only speak to my watch of it, but every time I watch it I think, good for you. That's what I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And her evolution of the film is very powerful, I think, to see how she starts as this, stranger to her own body, very rooted in this very misogynist, very toxic purity culture, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But by the end of the film, she has been able to embrace her body, embrace her sexuality, to understand herself and understand what this gift rather than curse. I never feel like it's presented as a curse. It's not presented as something she can't control. Again, thinking back to something like Ginger Snaps, where it's a very permanent transformation. This is something that is within her reach to manage and to use as she sees fit. But I do think that by the time you get to the end and she has become this, avenging angel sort of thing, going around, we know fear because she knows that she can defend herself and also remove these men from, to stop them from hurting other women, is a very empowering ending, I think.
It is, and I like the fact that she doesn't, she's born this way, right? She doesn't develop vagina dentata as a result of trauma. It is very set up at the beginning of the film that it is that power exists within her already, and I find that I like the fact that that they've set up the story that way rather than her reacting to this environment really. So I find that really powerful.
Yeah, there is also that element of disbelief that people might have as well, that how could she get to a teenage years and not know that she'd got these teeth. But I think there might be a sense of disbelief from people around how can she get to be in this age and not know that she's got teeth. But particularly in context of her and purity culture, but I just think generally in terms of how girls and then adolescent women and women are socialised, there is, that masturbation is wrong or shameful, that we're very much encouraged to be unaware of our body and our limits, and even things...
Exactly. I don't know how...
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think that's one part of the film that I think most women don't have a problem to believe, right? Because we don't know our own bodies, so well, and especially in, as you mentioned, in that context of purity culture. But not only, I mean, even if you remove that, I think that most women can relate to the idea of being a stranger to their own bodies.
Well, even things like don't use tampons or don't ride a horse. all these bizarre things that women are told.
That we've all heard.
Yeah, it's so
absolutely.
It's so don't swim on your period. You know, it's all really strange.
That takes me back.
Yeah, but it's so I do feel that is a very accurate representation, and you know, this film really does go into purity culture. You know, very, very much so. But before we move on to purity culture, I would just like to share. So I found there's quite an interesting... So we've got this very large period, really from the start of human history to present day, of mythology around vagina dentata, and it takes many forms and it's present in many different cultures. But because I was thinking about this for our podcast, I did think that there's a very interesting sort of cyclical approach to this. So we've got this idea that there's a myth that women have toothed vaginas, but then we have seen attempts to give women toothed vaginas as part of rape prevention. So there was something called the Rape Acts developed by a woman in South Africa, where instances of rape are horrendously high. And conviction rates, so low. So essentially, this is worn like a female condom, but it's filled with barbs. So if a woman was to be raped, these barbs stick into the penis of their attacker, and then it needs to be surgically removed. Which in the design of this, the woman who developed it said this will help catch people because they'll have to go to a hospital to get it removed. And I mean, I think, again, good for you. That's my my view on it.
That's my gut reaction as well.
My gut reaction
yes.
is, good for you. And similarly,
I wear condoms for all women.
Yes. Vagina dentata condoms for all. And another, a man actually in South Africa invented something that's shaped like a tampon. Coming back to the telltale tampon again. But it's this plastic cord that's got a spring blade in it, so when it's pressed, it will, basically chop off the tip of a penis. And
Ooh.
Again, good for you, I say. Mm-hmm. But what I thought is interesting about this, and it comes into, I think, we talked a little bit before this about the backlash to the film, but these inventions of being called vengeful, horrible, and disgusting in the media, in the somehow to want. I find that term vengeful quite interesting. Yeah,
very loaded, isn't it?
Yeah,
the idea that you punish the consequence rather than the cause.
Yeah, like, why would you want revenge? How horrible, how disgusting. Yeah, so I did think about the sort of backlash against teeth when I were reading about that. So I don't know, do you want to add anything about that, the backlash?
I think it's really, not so much about, I mean, we can talk about the backlash, obviously, but it makes me, to hear you say this, it makes me, think that also in the film, there is, there's not a lot of time. I mean, Dawn doesn't, it's not approached in a way that she is traumatized by, what's happened with Tobey. She actually feels, she deals with that guilt of having hurt someone who has purposely, fully on, raped her. But, she spends most of the film, dealing with the guilt of having hurt them. And I think, in terms of reception, I think a lot of people seem to have, or a lot of men I know that I talked about seem to have a problem with that. But I think it's, for me, I was kind of like, I feel like it's not an unusual victim response, actually. To everybody deals with trauma in very different way, obviously, but I just think it's I just think people had the backlash around it is maybe that it made people feel uncomfortable how differently it was addressed, that they felt is right or wrong. People have a very clear idea of how what should happen in this kind of situation without taking into account how very what trauma response actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that films like this should be presenting in that way. So most women who are raped don't go on a vengeful killing spree, unfortunately.
Sadly.
But, you know, Dawn's reaction is a very human one in that she does, because she doesn't, and again, that's part of her evolution of the film as well. So initially she's very guilty because she doesn't know what's happening. And as she comes to understand herself and understand her body, then by the time we get to the end, you know, you see that her decision is she's not going to fight that creepy old guy. She's not going to, you know, because she knows that she can fight him in a different way. And I think that sort of that last shot, when she turns to camera, is so powerful because it shows that she has become what she needs to be to survive in a world that is set up to harm her. And I think that's the real message for me from the film anyway, is that she becomes monstrous again. I don't think she's monstrous, but she leans into her monstrosity because that is the way that she will survive in the world that puts her in danger, which again is a very empathic and powerful message, I think.
And that's the real evolution of the film. You know, there is that scene in the film where they talk about, you know, like our animals develop certain, you know, traits in order to evolve and survive. And I think for me, this is the real evolution. It's like it's not the biological evolution of her. It's her psychological evolution.
Yeah.
You know, and that you're right. The last frame of the film, I just think is so powerful because you can see her whole demeanor has changed completely, and she knows that she's the one in control. She's the one with the power now.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. And you know, purity culture obviously is a massive element to this film, and it's not something that ever really made its way to UK as far as I'm aware anyway. I'm sure there were, you know, maybe small pockets of it, but it was a massive thing in America, across the nation really, wasn't it? But yeah. What are your thoughts on purity culture, Clelia?
Yeah, I feel like it's something that was really big in the early 2000s in America, as as a backlash to how sexual they felt, you know, pop culture was, maybe as a response to, you know, the Britneys, the Christina, women, being a little bit too powerful and sexual for their liking, and so what George W. Bush America decided that it was time to crack down, and the best way to do that is to stop super horny teenager to have sex or think about sex and to demonize sex, and like, you know, as if like, you know, people don't learn from, you know, from history, and like, you know, and the idea that, you know, the more you repress people, the more it's going to come out in a really, really monstrous way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, you know, well highlighted in this film with Tobey, that is going along with this purity culture, and, you know, he's paying lip service to it, but he don't believe in it. Whereas Dawn really does at the start, in a very
really believes in it,
really, you know, and you know, I mean, as a subculture, it's I'm not going to mince my words, it's grotesque. It's very focused on, you know, female chastity, even though young men are involved in it as well. But, you know, masturbation's discouraged, which again leads to this idea about Dawn's total lack of awareness about her own body. But when I were researching it, the thing that I found, so we know there's the purity rings, that's a big thing in the film, but they also had purity balls, where girls attended with the fathers, and they make a vow of abstinence that the father sort of vows to protect his daughter's virginity, essentially. And it's pitched as this way for fathers and daughters to have this really close relationship, because the idea is that if a young woman doesn't have a strong relationship with her father, that her urge for premarital sex will only increase because she's trying to seek love through these other relationships. Which, I mean, you know, paging psychoanalysis, I mean, is, you know, this idea that we're all, I mean, we'll get into this in other films, I'm sure, but I think Freud is is a stain on the discipline of psychology, but but to reduce women and the sexuality to this, or we see it so much now, this idea about daddy issues, it's so grotesque. Like that's the thing, that's the thing to throw at women now, isn't it? So these purity balls are just really gross, and they encourage women to see themselves as property, and it teaches them that they've got to subjugate the desires and the mental and physical well-being for men. And again, thinking about that heteronormative, where's the space for for queer people, where's the space for any other expression that's not this heteronormative, man, woman, dominated by Christianity, features this subjugation. And from my own research, actually, with young people, we know that then ideas through this get distorted. So, for instance, a lot of young people will do anal sex because that's not seen as losing your virginity. And again, this like toxic notion about the vagina as a sacred space that,
sacred cave.
Yeah. And
the dark crucible is referred to in the film, isn't it?
Yeah. And, but what is sex? I mean, this is the thing that happens with like purity culture and things, is that young people have got no outlet for sexual expression. And they did find that purity culture had no impact on STD rates in teens in America anyway. So you've just got a lot of really horny, frustrated teenagers who are still getting the same outcomes.
It's just so desperate, isn't it? It's just so desperate. It's as desperate as the pray the gay away, right? Then it's Puritan. Oh, sorry. Puritanical America, desperate attempt at, making people connect with that traditional idea of family and sexuality on society's term, and it's just it's vile. And what you mentioned about that it leads to teenagers having anal sex because it's not real sex, and I think that's mirrored in the film with Brad is obviously nowhere near in that purity circle, and yet there is a clear idea in the film that he saves himself for Dawn, right? So in a way it's the same idea being repeated there.
And he's got this fear of vaginas. He's terrified of vaginas, and that and I mean he's such a horrible character. It's so awful.
I read a really interesting article on Gauls Mag actually about Dawn's and Brad relationship, and kind of painting him as Perseus, as Medusa's man, at the fact that yes, like the storyline is absolutely horrendous, and he is such a vile character, but he's also the only man who doesn't is not violent towards Dawn, and in fact, he's so desperate for for her love, a way you imagine, because he really has this obsession towards her. He really thinks that they are meant to be together. So that I just found the analysis really interesting, and it kind of made me reevaluate his character, and the way he is with his girlfriend and with his dog called Mother. It's really there's a lot to unpack there around his character as well, I think.
And that's what another interesting element I think to the film, which is that we see Dawn's evolution from this like modest defender of purity through to the badass teeth snapping heroine that we need. Maybe not the one we deserve, but
another one deserves, definitely the one we need.
But his character as well, you see his journey through, and you start to understand his animosity and his anger, and that in that scene where he's saying to his dad, "Why did you have to make her my sister?" and then it's clear to his dad that he's got this infatuation, and then he's disgusted, and it's just all surrounded by disgust. But again, in an environment where you're not encouraged to express yourself sexually, and you're not encouraged to talk about these things, then really this obsession's just festered for years with no outlet, because he's got no space to talk about it. And I do think that is one of the biggest messages from the film, which is that, openness about sex leads to healthy sexual lives, and you know, making it shameful, making it difficult to talk about, suppression just festers. It just is poison, isn't it? You know, and he's become a very he's become a poisoned example of what masculinity looks like because he's not had that outlet. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I feel sorry for him because, you know.
Oh God, no. We're not going there.
You know, but then again, like, even to think about, you know, his girlfriends who are just putting up with him being awful. And again, what does that say about women and their expectations of relationships and the value that they place on the self, that they don't think that they can do better than this guy who, you know, calls his dog mom and is in love with his sister and.
But I think it's really framed in you know, to circle back to what you were saying at the start of this conversation around the fact that, you know, it's men and toxic masculinity and patriarchy that is framed as abject in this film, and repressions, you know, all these themes for me are what comes out as being, you know, framed as the abject in the film, and women are seen as, you know, the victim of this oppression, and then the weapons they have to develop to make it in this world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is such a unfortunately such a small part, such a limited example of that sort of thing, because we don't get many examples like that, which is why we wanted to talk about Teeth, and why I hope if people have avoided it because they think maybe it's just a, you know, bit of a schlocky comedy sort of thing, it's got much more to it, but it uses that comedic timing and things so effectively, and I do think when you think about horror and what horror does with tension, horror and comedy are not far removed, really. There's a very I agree. And so to use that sometimes to break that tension. So for instance, you know, in the scene with Tobey and Dawn, when, you know, he's attacked her and he's hurt her, like he's and it's really awful. But then when he's castrated, he's so pathetic, it becomes humorous. So again, like making him the abject and making him, you know, the object of disgust. But again, for the audience, it breaks that tension that other films don't. And I mean, I'm calling to mind because I've watched it recently to do a review of it, Irreversible, which, if any film ever needed a comedic interlude, I think
that'd be it.
But you know, you can see again. And again, much like I Spit on Your Grave, I don't think it's a fair comparison to put Teeth and them together because the aim of the films are very different. But when you think about how films have dealt with rape scenes and sexual violence, I do think, again, Teeth's approach to it is refreshing in the fact that it's not seeking to traumatise us along with Dawn, which I think a lot of films do when they're presenting sexual violence. It's really the catalyst to a revolution, but also it's a way to show a mirror to society and say, this is what society looks like.
Yeah, and again, you know, we never laugh at Dawn in those situations, right? Like every time there is a comedy element to the film, it's definitely at the expense of the men. And as you said, when after the rape scene with Tobey, and he's framed as such a pathetic little man, right, with his dick chopped off, and it is so satisfying. And I think this is why women, respond so powerfully to this film, because they're like, fuck yeah.
Yeah. And that again, making your attacker small, showing that people, showing that men who rape women are small, cowardly people, because otherwise they wouldn't do what they do. Whereas in other films, it becomes that they are the sort of powerful,
power over them.
or and while, I mean, I think what is interesting as well that we've not really touched on is, well, we have a little bit, I suppose, but that idea that sexual pleasure and is linked so readily to Dawn's ability to control her vagina dentata. So when she's enjoying herself, which I think again is nice when we think about how women as monsters are presented, there's often that punishment element. So again, Ginger Snaps that we talked about last time, Ginger's sexual a sexual sort of awakening comes in tandem with becoming a werewolf, and so there's not really she doesn't get any joy from it. There's no pleasure to it. It's just an urge like her other urges, you know. Whereas in Teeth, when Dawn is shown as someone who does have pleasure and is allowed pleasure, even though she's got this aberration, I suppose you would call it, she can still find that pleasure and enjoy sex. And I think that's a nice way to present the myth as well, is that it's something that's triggered by external forces.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very much, it's very much putting her at the center of her sexuality, right? You have no problem, imagining at the end of the film that, Dawn will be totally capable of pleasuring herself, taking pleasure with with the partner she chooses. But then when it's very much, unwanted sexual attention, then she's able to use that. And it's,
I
think
again,
he left us all wanting a vagina dentata.
Yeah.
Where do I get mine?
Where's mine? Yeah.
Where's mine?
But that's the thing. For me, at least, I come away from that film every time just really thinking, good for you. That's it. I just think good for you. I'm so glad for you. You know that you can defend yourself and look after yourself, and it is very empowering in that way, and to present pleasure in a very positive way, which it does as well. Even though it's with a guy who's a creep, but then he gets his just desserts, and again, that's very empowering. She's not
exactly.
So she's not diminished. What I like about it is, so she does have sex with this guy, and it turns out to be a creep. But she's not diminished by that. It's not like, oh, what a mistake. Oh, no. She doesn't have any shame. She doesn't have any guilt. And that is so important as well, I think, to present sex like that. Getting tied up to this idea about virginity and, all these constructs.
Yes, exactly. All that. Exactly. As I said, virginity, mistakes, etc., etc. She just, from each encounter, she becomes, more certain of her beliefs, and more assertive in and walking more and more in her power. So I love that.
Yeah. Oh, I just love it. I think it's brilliant.
It is.
Is there anything else you would like to add, Clelia, about Teeth?
I think we've covered quite. I mean, we could talk about it for hours and hours. There is so much, I said, to unpack about it. But I'd love to know, your recommendations to listeners for if they finally got around to watching it. Then what should they watch next if they enjoy it?
Oh, well, this is the thing. It's such a film that crosses so many different genre boundaries, I think, isn't it? That it's a difficult one. I would definitely say if people like revenge, I love revenge films. And so one of the problems that I have is that most revenge films that centre on women are like rape revenge. And when they're really graphic sexual scenes, I don't really want to watch it. That's just not my bag. So Irreversible were a challenge to watch.
Yeah, definitely not the one that you recommend then.
Yeah, but I would definitely say Lady Vengeance. I love that. Yes. That's one of my absolute favourites, and I just think, again, to see a character that is empowered through, just not giving a fuck what other people think, I really like. And the revenge journey itself is very satisfying, although it's also very heartbreaking. So I would say Lady Vengeance, definitely. But what about you? What recommendations do you have?
I'll go down this super violent route of the rape revenge, not the rape element, but in terms of revenge, I think MS-45 is such a such a powerful one, and. What would I have as well? A Gun for Jennifer.
Yes,
is what I wrote down. But I think the end of Teeth makes me wanna, my thirst for revenge is activated by the end of the film. So I'm like, yes, let's see some men getting their up comments.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I'm not aware of many other, if any other, films about vagina dentata, which. I think
I'm not either.
Yeah.
I think again, I was reading an article this afternoon that was saying that maybe the most powerful vagina dentata film of all time is Jaws, and he made me think, hey, that is a good point. So I think maybe I will revisit Jaws. Well,
Jaws,
with that reading.
So people watch Jaws and see if you think it speaks to the vagina dentata. But yeah, I mean, it's such an underused like piece of folklore, I think. Which is
definitely we need more.
We need more. We definitely need more. Yes, I did find out that the vagina dentata is not just a myth. That there is such a thing as a dermoid cyst, which is usually found it can be found anywhere. And I think Stephen King even wrote a story once, but it was like in someone's brain or whatever. But can occur in like the ovaries and sometimes, very rarely, in the vagina. But people have found teeth in vaginas. And there's there's a museum, I think it's in London actually, that's got, one in a jar or whatever, these like oddity museums.
So Meg, you are telling me there is hope yet.
There's hope yet. We could conjure the teeth. But that was just a weird fact that obviously I would love as such a ghoulish, macabre person. But yes, so I mean, I think we've done a very thorough dive into teeth. And I've very much enjoyed it. And I will look forward to our discussion about our next film.
I loved it. Thank you so much. That was such a great episode. And I hope everybody enjoyed it. So Thank you so much for listening to Monstrous Flesh. And please join us next week. We will be talking about The Lure. You can find out more about us via our website, monstrousflesh.co.uk. And you can also find all sources in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you, as usual. Also, please rate and review wherever you listen to podcasts and help us spread our spooky word by telling your friends about Monstrous Flesh. And until next time, creep it weird, everyone.